A sudden blizzard descended upon Detroit on Christmas night, blanketing the city in a thick, unforgiving layer of snow. In a forgotten corner of the city, nestled at the end of Maple Street, stood a small, dilapidated diner. Inside, Kesha Williams, a woman weathered beyond her 32 years, was battling a trifecta of misfortune: no electricity, a broken-down heater, and her 2-year-old son, Marcus, shivering uncontrollably from the bitter cold. The diner, once a beacon of warmth and community, now felt like a frozen tomb. Suddenly, above the howling wind, a distinct rumble cut through the silence. The unmistakable sound of motorcycle engines. A wave of apprehension washed over Kesha as 25 imposing figures on roaring Hell's Angels motorcycles materialized outside, lining up in front of her diner's entrance. They were seeking refuge from the brutal snowstorm. Fear warred with compassion in Kesha's heart, but her inherent kindness ultimately won. Against her better judgment, she extended an invitation, ushering them inside. In the close quarters of the diner, an unlikely camaraderie blossomed. Together, they pooled their resources, sharing stories and laughter as they cooked a simple meal over the gas stove. For a few precious hours, the diner transformed into a haven of warmth and connection, a stark contrast to the frigid world outside. Little did Kesha know that her act of selfless generosity would, just 3 days later, summon 1,500 roaring motorcycles to her doorstep, forever altering not only her life, but also the fate of an entire community. But before we fast forward to that pivotal moment, let us know where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I got something extra special for you. The clock on the cracked kitchen wall ticked laboriously, each second echoing the weight of Kesha's mounting worries. It read 3:47 in the morning when Kesha Williams finally allowed herself to sink into a rickety chair. Her hands, calloused from endless hours of scrubbing and cleaning, trembled as she meticulously counted the crumpled bills scattered across the worn wooden table. A meager sum, the only barrier between her beloved 2-year-old son, Marcus, and the gnawing emptiness of hunger that would surely come with the morning. Kesha pressed her palms against her tired eyes, feeling the crushing weight of exhaustion seep into her very bones. At 32, she appeared at least a decade older, her youthful glow long extinguished, replaced by the dull sheen of someone who toiled at 3 backbreaking jobs just to survive. The small, drafty house around her creaked and groaned in the relentless winter wind, a constant, unwelcome reminder of her profound solitude. In the corner of the kitchen, Marcus slept peacefully, curled up in a makeshift bed she had lovingly fashioned from old blankets and discarded couch cushions. The ancient heater in his bedroom had given up the ghost 2 weeks prior, and with her paltry income, she couldn't even dream of affording a replacement. So, she kept him close, within reach of the faint warmth emanating from the stove. His tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, his innocent mind blissfully unaware of the tempest raging in his mother's soul, a sea of unpaid bills and shattered aspirations. The house stood isolated at the end of Maple Street in a neglected part of Detroit, separated from the other homes by an empty lot that nobody seemed to want to touch. It was as if the neighborhood had deliberately pushed her to the fringes, mirroring the way everything else in her life had been marginalized. The white families who resided in the nicer houses down the street rarely acknowledged her existence. And when they did, it was usually with suspicious glances or hushed conversations that abruptly ceased the moment she walked by. "Why did you have to leave us, Jerome?" she whispered into the empty room, her voice barely audible above the incessant humming of the ancient refrigerator. Her ex-husband had walked out 8 months prior, claiming he needed to find himself. He had found himself, all right, living with a 23-year-old waitress in Tennessee, completely neglecting the child support payments that were supposed to help keep his son fed and sheltered. The divorce papers lay in a faded folder atop the refrigerator, stamped with red ink that might as well have been blood for all the pain they represented. Suddenly, Kesha's phone buzzed against the table, making her jump. A text message from her manager at the cleaning company glowed ominously on the screen. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow. We're letting you go. Your kid was crying too much during your shift yesterday. Customers complained." The words struck her like a physical blow, each syllable a hammer blow to her already fragile spirit. She stared at the message, reading it over and over again, desperately hoping that the letters would somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. That was the 3rd job she had lost in just 2 months. The laundromat had fired her when Marcus got sick, and she had no choice but to bring him to work. The diner had let her go when she had briefly fallen asleep during her shift after working 18 hours straight between all 3 jobs. "How am I supposed to work if I can't find anyone to watch you, baby?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on her sleeping son. Daycare cost $200 a week, a sum so far beyond her reach it felt like an obscene joke. Family help was non-existent since her mother had passed away 3 years earlier, taking with her the last person who truly understood Kesha's struggles. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, stern but laced with an unwavering love. "Kesha, honey, remember what I taught you about my grandmother's fried chicken recipe? That secret blend of spices has been in our family for generations. One day, when times get tough, that recipe might just save you." At the time, Kesha had smiled and nodded, never imagining that she would one day need salvation from a handful of herbs and spices. But now, sitting in her cold kitchen with her last $7, her mother's words felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. She rose and walked to the old wooden cabinet where she kept her mother's recipe box. The index cards inside were yellowed with age, covered in her mother's meticulous handwriting. The fried chicken recipe was there, along with detailed instructions for sides and sauces that made her mouth water just reading them. Her mother had run a small soul food restaurant when Kesha was young, before the neighborhood changed and the customers stopped coming. "Maybe it's time to try again," she said to herself, though doubt immediately crept into her voice. The next morning, Kesha used her last $7 to buy chicken and basic ingredients. She set up 2 folding tables in her living room, creating a makeshift dining area next to her tiny kitchen. She created a handwritten menu on poster board and propped it against the front window. "Mama's Kitchen." It read in careful letters, "Authentic soul food made with love." Marcus sat in his high chair, babbling happily as the intoxicating aroma of perfectly seasoned fried chicken filled the house. The secret was in the blend of spices her mother had taught her, a combination that made the coating crispy and flavorful in a way that made people close their eyes and sigh with pure satisfaction. But as the hours passed, the harsh reality set in. She watched through her window as people hurried by on their way to the bus stop. Some slowed down when they noticed the menu in her window, but when they caught sight of her dark face through the glass, they quickened their pace and looked away. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 houses down, actually stopped and read the entire menu. Kesha felt her heart leap with a surge of hope and rushed to open the door. Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. Would you like to try some of my fried chicken? It's made from my grandmother's recipe. Mrs. Henderson's expression changed the moment she saw Kesha's face. The older white woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion and something that looked uncomfortably like disgust. I don't think so, she said, backing away from the door. I've heard about you. Single mother, no husband around. Probably don't even know who the father is.
I don't eat food from people like that.
The words cut deep, but Kesha forced herself to keep smiling. The food is really good, ma'am. I promise it's clean and fresh. I said, no, Mrs. Henderson snapped. And you shouldn't be running a business out of your house. This is a decent neighborhood. Keep your kind of trouble to yourself. Kesha watched her neighbor storm away, her chest tight with humiliation and anger. She closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of rejection settle over her like a heavy blanket. Marcus looked up at her from his high chair, his innocent eyes wide and trusting. It's okay, baby, she whispered, picking him up and holding him close. Mama's going to figure this out. I promise. But as she looked around her empty restaurant, inhaling the delicious aroma of food that no one wanted to buy, Kesha wondered if some promises were simply too big for one person to keep. Outside, the Detroit winter pressed against her windows, its icy grip mirroring the cold isolation she felt inside. The phone rang again. Another bill collector, no doubt. She let it go to voicemail, knowing she had nothing to tell them that they wanted to hear. Tomorrow, she would have to find another job, assuming anyone would hire a single black mother with a history of bringing her child to work. Marcus reached up and touched her face with his small hand as if he could sense her sadness. Mama, he said, one of the few words he knew clearly. I'm here, baby, she replied, her voice thick with tears she desperately refused to let fall. Mama's right here. As the afternoon light faded through her windows, Kesha Williams held her son close and wondered how much longer she could keep fighting a world that seemed determined to keep her down. The smell of her mother's fried chicken recipe still lingered in the air, a poignant reminder of dreams that felt increasingly out of reach. 3 weeks had passed since Mrs. Henderson's cruel words, and Kesha's small restaurant venture had attracted exactly 4 customers. 4 brave souls who had tasted her mother's fried chicken recipe and declared it the best they had ever eaten. But 4 customers couldn't pay the rent or keep the lights on, and the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table had grown taller each day. December 23rd arrived with an ominous gray sky that promised trouble. The weather reports had been warning about it for days, the worst snowstorm to hit Detroit in 20 years. Kesha stood at her kitchen window, watching the first flakes begin to fall as she stirred a pot of chicken and dumplings. At least she had managed to stock up on supplies before the storm hit. The few customers she had served had given her just enough money to buy ingredients in bulk, thinking optimistically about the Christmas rush that never came. Mama cold, Marcus said from his high chair, rubbing his small hands together. Kesha turned up the heat on the stove and wrapped her son in an extra blanket. The house felt colder than usual, but she assumed it was just the storm approaching. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows with increasing intensity. By evening, the snow was falling in thick sheets that obscured everything beyond her front yard. The weather had become so severe that even the few cars that normally passed by her isolated house had disappeared completely. The silence was eerie, broken only by the howling wind and the occasional creak of tree branches bending under the weight of accumulating snow. Kesha fed Marcus's dinner and got him ready for bed, trying to ignore the growing cold that seemed to seep through the walls. She had turned the thermostat up twice, but the house didn't feel any warmer. A nagging worry began to form in the back of her mind. On Christmas Eve morning, she woke to a house that felt like a freezer. Her breath formed visible clouds in the air, and Marcus was shivering uncontrollably despite being bundled in every blanket she owned. She rushed to the thermostat and found it displaying an error message she had never seen before. No, 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 she whispered, pressing buttons frantically. Not now, please.
Not now.
She tried calling the heating repair service, but the automated message informed her that due to the severe weather conditions, all non-emergency calls would be handled after the storm passed. Emergency calls had a 72-hour wait time. 72 hours, she said aloud, staring at her phone in disbelief. Marcus began to cry, a thin, wailing sound that made her heart clench with panic. She picked him up and held him close, feeling how cold his little body had become despite the layers of clothing. The power went out that afternoon with a sudden click that plunged the house into darkness. Kesha fumbled for candles and matches, her hands shaking from both cold and fear. The few flickering flames provided minimal light and even less warmth. Outside, the storm raged with a fury that seemed almost supernatural, as if nature itself was determined to test her resolve. She moved Marcus into the kitchen, the smallest room in the house, hoping to conserve what little heat the candles could provide. Fortunately, her gas stove still worked, so she kept pots of water boiling continuously, creating steam that offered some relief from the bitter cold. She opened the oven door and let the heat from the pilot light help warm the small space. It's going to be okay, baby, she whispered to Marcus, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Mama's got food, and we're going to stay warm right here in the kitchen. The stockpile of ingredients she had bought for her restaurant became their salvation. Canned goods, dried beans, rice flour, and various seasonings lined the shelves. She had enough food to last several days, maybe even a week if she was careful. It was the one blessing in an otherwise desperate situation. By the second day, the cold had become unbearable. Kesha wrapped herself and Marcus in every piece of fabric she could find, creating a cocoon of blankets and coats around them as they huddled near the stove. The candles had burned down to stubs, and she was rationing the remaining ones carefully. Marcus had developed a slight cough that worried her constantly. She held him against her chest, feeling his small body shake with each cough, and wondered how long they could survive in these conditions. The snow outside had piled so high against the windows that it blocked most of the natural light, making the house feel like a tomb. On the third night, as she sat in the dark, listening to the wind howl like an angry beast, Kesha heard something that made her freeze. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the storm itself. But as she listened more carefully, the sound became unmistakable. Motorcycle engines. The deep rumbling growl of multiple Harley-Davidson motorcycles cutting through the storm like mechanical thunder. The sound grew louder and closer until it seemed to surround her house completely. Through the small gap in the snow-covered window, she could see the flickering glow of headlights approaching. Who would be riding motorcycles in this weather? She whispered to herself, clutching Marcus tighter. The engines grew louder and louder until they seemed to shake the very foundation of her house. Then suddenly they stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more frightening than the noise had been. Kesha's heart pounded in her chest as she strained to hear what was happening outside. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow, multiple sets of boots making their way toward her front door. She could hear muffled voices, deep and rough, speaking in low tones. She couldn't quite make out. Marcus stirred in her arms, awakening from his fitful sleep. Then came the knock. 3 deliberate raps on her front door that echoed through the cold house like gunshots. Kesha's breath caught in her throat. In all her years of living in the isolated house at the end of Maple Street, no one had ever come to her door during a storm, especially not anyone riding motorcycles through a blizzard. The knock came again, more insistent this time, followed by a voice that carried through the wind. "Ma'am, we need help. We're freezing out here." Kesha's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Who were these people? What did they want? And why had they chosen her house of all places to stop at during the worst storm in 20 years? Marcus began to cry softly, as if he could sense his mother's fear. Kesha rocked him gently, trying to calm both him and herself as she stared at the front door and wondered if opening it would save them or destroy them. The wind howled louder, and the knock came a third time. The third knock echoed through the house like a gunshot, and Kesha felt her heart slam against her ribs. Marcus whimpered in her arm, sensing his mother's terror through the way her body had gone rigid. She pressed her back against the kitchen wall as far from the front door as she could get while still being able to hear what was happening outside. "Please, ma'am." The voice called again, rougher now, but with an edge of desperation. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just need to get out of the storm." Through the gap in the snow-covered window, Kesha could make out dark shapes moving in the swirling white. The headlights of the motorcycles cut through the blizzard like angry eyes casting long shadows that danced across her yard. She counted at least 6 or 7 bikes, maybe more. Her mind immediately went to every news story she had ever heard about motorcycle gangs, every warning her mother had given her about dangerous men who rode in packs. "Think, Kesha, think," she whispered to herself, bouncing Marcus gently as he began to fuss. She crept closer to the front window, staying low and keeping Marcus close to her chest. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. 25 men in heavy leather jackets stood in her front yard, their faces hidden behind helmets and scarves. Snow clung to their shoulders and arms, and even from inside the house, she could see how they shivered and stamped their feet against the cold. The man at the front of the group was enormous. Even bundled in winter gear, his size was intimidating. He had removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face, framed by a thick beard that was already accumulating snow. His eyes, visible even through the storm, were sharp and alert. When he looked directly at her window, Kesha ducked down quickly, her heart hammering. "We know you're in there," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the wind. "We can see the candlelight. Look, I know this is scary, but we're not going anywhere in this weather. We can either freeze to death out here, or you can let us wait it out inside. We'll leave the moment the storm passes." Kesha's hands trembled as she held Marcus tighter. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to wait them out, and hope they would eventually leave. She had seen enough movies and heard enough stories to know what happened when women open their doors to strange men in the middle of the night, especially women like her alone, invulnerable with no one to call for help. But as she watched through the window, she saw one of the men stumble and nearly fall. Another reached out to steady him, and she could see dark stains on his pants that looked suspiciously like blood. These weren't men looking for trouble. These were men in genuine distress. Marcus coughed again, a harsh sound that reminded her how cold the house had become. If these men were suffering in the storm outside, they probably weren't much worse off than she and her son were inside. At least they had each other. She had been alone with her fear for 3 days now, and the isolation was starting to feel more dangerous than whatever waited outside her door. The memory of her mother's voice suddenly filled her mind, as clear as if she were standing right beside her. It was something her mother had said countless times during Kesha's childhood. Usually when they encountered homeless people or strangers asking for help, "Baby girl, when someone's in trouble, you help them. Doesn't matter what they look like or where they come from, you help them because one day you might be the one who needs helping. The good Lord sees everything, and what you give out comes back to you tenfold." Her mother had lived by those words, even when it meant giving away their last $10 to someone who claimed they needed bus fare. Even when it meant inviting strange neighbors over for dinner when they looked hungry, even when her father had complained that she was too trusting, too willing to see the good in people who might not deserve it. "Help the traveler in need," her mother had always said, "even if he looks like your enemy." Kesha looked down at Marcus, who was staring up at her with complete trust in his dark eyes. He was depending on her to make the right choice to keep him safe and warm. But keeping him safe might mean taking a risk that terrified her to her core. Another knock came gently this time. "Ma'am, we've got a man out here who's hurt pretty bad. He's been bleeding for hours and the cold isn't helping. I'm begging you, just until the storm passes. We'll sleep on the floor. We won't touch anything. We just need to get warm." Kesha closed her eyes and tried to think clearly. She could hear the pain in the man's voice now, the genuine desperation. These weren't the voices of predators. These were the voices of people who were as scared and cold as she was. She stood up slowly, careful not to startle Marcus, who was watching her every move with worried eyes, and walked toward the front door. Her legs felt like jelly, and every step seemed to take forever. When she reached the door, she pressed her forehead against the cold wood and tried to summon courage she wasn't sure she possessed. "Are you really hurt?" she called through the door. "Yes, ma'am. Danny here took a bad spill about 10 miles back. We've been trying to find shelter ever since." "How many of you are there?" "Ma'am, I know that sounds like a lot, but we stick together. We don't leave anyone behind." The number hit her like a physical blow. 25 strange men in her tiny house with her and her baby. It was either the most foolish thing she could possibly do, or it was exactly what her mother would have done in the same situation. Marcus reached up and touched her face with his small hand, his fingers cold but gentle. He babbled something unintelligible, but his tone was encouraging, as if he were trying to tell her everything would be okay. "Mama's scared, baby," she whispered. But maybe being scared isn't always wrong. Maybe sometimes you have to be scared and brave at the same time. She took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and slowly opened the door. The man standing directly in front of her was even larger than she had imagined. His leather jacket was covered in patches and pins she didn't recognize, and his beard was streaked with gray. But when their eyes met, she saw something she hadn't expected. Kindness, exhaustion, gratitude, and beneath it all, a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with his intimidating appearance. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm Mike. We won't forget this." Behind him, the other 24 men stood in the swirling snow, waiting for permission to enter. They looked like a scene from a movie about outlaws and rebels. But as Kesha looked closer, she saw what Mike saw. Men who were cold, tired, and genuinely grateful for her kindness. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come in before you all freeze to death." As the first man stepped across her threshold, shaking snow from his jacket and stomping his boots on her doormat, Kesha realized she had just made a decision that would change everything. For better or worse, she was no longer alone. One by one, the 25 men filed through Kesha's front door, each one carefully wiping their boots on the small mat before stepping inside. What struck her immediately was how quietly they moved, how deliberately they avoided making any sudden movements that might frighten her or Marcus. These weren't the wild, reckless bikers she had seen in movies. They moved with the disciplined precision of soldiers. Mike entered last, closing the door firmly behind him and immediately throwing the deadbolt home. Catching Kesha's surprised expression, he raised both hands in a gesture of peace. "Just keepin' out the chill, ma'am, and making sure you're safe while we're here." Abruptly, the tiny house felt impossibly small. 25 burly men in thick leather jackets crowded every inch of available space in her living room and kitchen. Yet, instead of the chaos she'd braced for, an almost holy quiet descended as they took in her humble abode. Some removed their helmets and gloves, revealing faces etched with weather and life's hard knocks, but not unkind. "Thank you," a younger man near the doorway whispered, his voice barely audible. "You have no idea what this means." Marcus peeked out from behind his mountain of blankets, his eyes wide with curiosity, not fear. One of the bikers, a man with silver threading through his temples and kind eyes, noticed him watching and offered a small wave. Marcus ducked back behind the blankets, then slowly emerged once more, completely captivated despite himself. "Is that your little boy?" the man asked Kesha gently. "Yes, that's Marcus. He's 2. Beautiful child."
"I'm Tommy.
"I've got grandkids about his age." Kesha felt some of the tension bleed out of her. Tommy looked more like a grandfather than a hardened criminal. His leather jacket was worn and patched, but clean. His beard was neatly trimmed, and when he smiled at Marcus, genuine warmth radiated from the corners of his eyes. Mike stepped forward, and Kesha noticed for the first time that he favored his left leg. "Ma'am, I need to be straight with you about something. We've got a man here who's hurt pretty bad. Danny took a spill on the ice about 10 miles back, and he's been bleeding ever since. Do you have any first aid supplies?" Kesha followed Mike's gaze, and saw a young man slumped heavily on her couch. His face was ashen, and dark stains bloomed across the left leg of his jeans. Even from across the room, she could see his hands trembling. "I have some things," she said, already moving toward the bathroom.
"Let me get my supplies."
She returned with a plastic container filled with bandages, antiseptic wipes, and medical tape. Kneeling beside Danny, she could see that he was younger than the rest, maybe in his mid-20s. His eyes were glazed over with pain, and when she gently touched his leg to examine the wound, he winced but didn't flinch away. "This is pretty deep," she said, glancing up at Mike. "He really should see a doctor." "Can't get to one in this storm," Mike replied. "Roads are completely blocked. We've been trying to get him help for hours." Kesha looked down at the young man's pale face and made a decision. "I can clean it and bandage it, but you need to keep pressure on it to stop the bleeding." As she worked carefully, cleaning the wound and applying antiseptic, the other men watched in utter silence. She could feel their eyes on her, but there was no threat in their attention. Instead, she sensed something she hadn't anticipated. Respect. "You're good at this," Danny said weakly as she wrapped his leg with clean bandages. "My mother was a nurse before she opened her restaurant," Kesha replied. "She taught me a few things." While she tended to Danny's injury, the other men had begun organizing themselves without being asked. Some had moved to the kitchen, quietly assessing her meager food supplies. Others were checking the windows and doors, not in a menacing way, but as if securing the perimeter was second nature to them. "Ma'am," a man with a drawling southern accent said, "would it be alright if we made some food? We've got some rations in our packs, and it looks like you've got ingredients here. We could make enough for everyone." "Please call me Kesha," she said, finishing with Danny's bandage. "And yes, I've got plenty of food. I was trying to run a restaurant out of here." Mike's eyebrows shot up with interest. "A restaurant? What kind of food?" "Soul food. My mother's recipes. Fried chicken mostly." "Your mother's fried chicken," Tommy repeated with a grin. "Well, now we're talking. Haven't had real home cooking in months." As the evening wore on, something remarkable began to unfold. The kitchen filled with the comforting sounds of cooking and quiet conversation. Several of the men turned out to be surprisingly adept cooks, working together to prepare a meal that combined Kesha's ingredients with their own trail rations. The aroma of seasoned chicken and simmering vegetables soon permeated the cold house, filling it with a warmth and vitality it hadn't known in months. Marcus gradually emerged from his hiding spot, drawn by the soothing voices and the promise of food. Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor, showing Marcus how to build towers with empty food cans. Other men joined in, their rough hands surprisingly gentle as they played simple games with a toddler. "He's a smart one," observed a man named Jake, watching Marcus stack the cans with intense concentration. "Reminds me of my nephew back in Tennessee." As they sat down to eat, crowded around Kesha's small table and on the floor, Mike cleared his throat. "Kesha, I think we owe you an explanation about who we are and why we were out in the storm." She looked around at the assembled faces, some young, some old, all watching her with serious expressions. "We're mostly veterans," Mike began. "Army, Marines, Navy. We served together in different units over the years. And when we came home, we found it hard to fit back into regular life. The brotherhood we had over there, the sense of purpose, it was hard to find that in the civilian world. So, we found each other," added Tommy, started riding together, taking care of each other the way we did in service. We're not a gang, said Jake firmly. We don't deal drugs or hurt people. We're just men who needed a family, and we made one for ourselves. Danny, looking significantly better after the food and medical attention, spoke up from his spot on the couch. We were riding to a Christmas gathering in Chicago. All the chapters from the Midwest come together every year to do charity work. Toys for kids, food for families who need it. The storm caught us by surprise, Mike continued. Weather reports said it wouldn't hit until tomorrow. We were trying to make it to a motel when Danny's bike hit that patch of ice. Kesha listened to their stories with growing astonishment. These weren't the menacing criminals she had envisioned. They were men who had served their country, who had struggled to find their place in a world that didn't always understand them, and who had forged their own support system to help each other survive. I know what people think when they see us, Mike said quietly. The leather, the bikes, the tattoos. They see outlaws and troublemakers, but we're not. We're just trying to take care of our own, and maybe help some other people along the way. As Mike spoke, Kesha felt a familiar ache in her chest. The pain of being judged by appearances, of having people make assumptions about who you were based on how you looked. She thought about Mrs. Henderson's cruel words about the employers who wouldn't hire her, about the neighbors who crossed the street when they saw her coming. I understand, she said softly. People look at me and see a single black mother in a poor neighborhood, and they think they know everything about me. They think I'm lazy or irresponsible, or that I must have done something wrong to end up where I am. The room fell silent, save for the crackling of the candles and the distant howl of the wind outside. Mike's expression had grown distant, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the walls of her small house. I had a daughter once, he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Emily, she was 6 years old. Beautiful little girl with blonde pigtails and the biggest smile you ever saw, his hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. Leukemia took her 3 years ago. Fought for 18 months, but the cancer won. Several of the men shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke. This was clearly painful territory that Mike rarely visited. Her mother blamed me, he continued. Said if I'd been a better provider, if I'd had better insurance, maybe we could have gotten her into better treatment programs. Maybe she'd still be alive. His voice cracked slightly. After Emily died, my wife left. Said she couldn't look at me without seeing what we'd lost. Kesha felt tears welling in her eyes. Mike, I'm so sorry. Point is, Mike said, looking directly at her. People think they know why I ride with these guys. Think it's because I'm running from responsibility or looking for trouble. Truth is, I'm running from an empty house and a marriage that died with my little girl. These men, they're the only family I have left. The vulnerability in his voice seemed to break something open in the room. Kesha found herself speaking before she had consciously decided to share her own story. My husband left 8 months ago, she said, her voice steady despite the pain the words carried. Jerome said he couldn't handle the pressure of being a father, couldn't handle being poor. Said he needed to find himself. She let out a bitter laugh. Turns out he found himself with a 23-year-old waitress in Tennessee. Did he ever see Marcus help support him? Asked Tommy gently. Not once. Not a phone call, not a dollar, nothing. It's like we never existed. Kesha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. People see me struggling and they assume I picked a bad man, or that I was careless, or that I'm just another statistic. They don't see that I love someone who promised to love me back, and that I'm doing everything I can to give my son a good life. Sometimes life just breaks people, Mike said simply. And sometimes it breaks the people who love them, too. The shared pain seemed to settle over the room like a warm blanket. These were people who understood loss, who knew what it meant to have the world judge you for circumstances beyond your control. But you opened your door anyway, Mike said. Even though you were scared, even though you had every reason not to trust us. My mother always told me to help people who were in trouble, Kesha replied. She said that when you turn away from someone who needs help, you're really turning away from yourself. Marcus had fallen asleep in Tommy's lap, his small body relaxed and peaceful. The sight of her son sleeping safely in the arms of a man she had been terrified of just hours earlier made Kesha's eyes fill with tears. Thank you, she whispered. All of you. I haven't felt this safe in my own home in a long time. Mike nodded solemnly. Neither have we, Kesha. Neither have we. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault. But inside the small house at the end of Maple Street, 25 strangers and a single mother had found something precious and rare, a place where they could simply be human beings, taking care of each other. As the evening deepened, the small house settled into an unusual but comfortable rhythm. The 25 bikers had arranged themselves throughout the living room and kitchen, some sitting on the floor with their backs against the walls, others sprawled on cushions they had pulled from the couch. The candlelight danced across weathered faces that had softened into expressions of genuine contentment. For the first time in months, Kesha's house felt truly warm, not just from the collective body heat of 25 additional people, but from something deeper. The crushing loneliness that had been her constant companion seemed to lift like a physical weight, finally removed from her weary shoulders. She moved through her own home with a lightness she had almost forgotten existed. Marcus had claimed Tommy as his new best friend, insisting on showing him every toy he owned and chattering away in the half-words and gestures that only 2-year-olds could master. Tommy listened with the patient attentiveness of a man who truly understood children, responding to Marcus babbling as if it were the most important conversation he had ever had. He's got good instincts about people, Mike observed, watching Marcus attempt to braid Tommy's beard. Kids always know. He's been so lonely, Kesha said quietly. It's just been the two of us for so long. He's not used to having this many people around, but he seems to love it. We all do, said Jake from his spot near the window. Been a long time since any of us sat around a family table like this. Danny had been dozing on the couch, his color much improved after the meal and medical attention. But around midnight, Mike noticed that Danny was shifting restlessly, making small sounds of discomfort. He approached quietly and placed his hand on Danny's forehead. His skin was burning hot. Guys, wake up, Mike called urgently, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere. Danny's burning up with fever. The men stirred immediately, their military training kicking in as they responded to the alarm in their leader's voice. Within seconds, 24 bikers were gathered around the couch, their faces etched with concern as they looked down at their friend. What do we do? Asked Pete, his voice tight with worry.
This is bad, Mike. Really bad.
Should we try to get him to a hospital? Suggested Jake. Maybe the roads are clear enough now? Mike shook his head grimly. Roads are still blocked solid. I checked an hour ago. We're not getting anywhere until this storm passes completely. Tommy knelt beside the couch and touched Danny's face gently. He's burning up. This isn't just a regular fever. In Afghanistan, when guys got fevers like this, the medics would. His voice trailed off helplessly. But we don't have any medics here. We need to cool him down somehow, said Mike, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty.
But I don't know how.
Hell, I don't know anything about taking care of sick people. The men looked at each other with growing panic. These were tough individuals who had faced combat, who had survived dangerous situations around the world. But the sight of their friend burning up with fever had reduced them to helpless confusion. What if he gets worse? Whispered Pete. What if we lose him? We're not losing anybody, Mike said firmly. But Kesha could hear the fear beneath his determined words. From her spot in the kitchen, Kesha had been listening to their increasingly desperate conversation. She watched these strong men struggle with their friend's condition, saw the genuine terror in their eyes at the thought of losing Danny. Their helplessness was heartbreaking. She stepped forward quietly. Mike, I can help. All 24 men turned to look at her, their expressions a mixture of hope and desperation. You know about this stuff? Mike asked, not bothering to hide the relief in his voice.
Some.
My mother was a nurse before she opened her restaurant. She taught me how to handle fevers and basic medical care. Please, said Tommy, his voice breaking slightly. We don't know what to do. We'll try anything. Kesha looked around at the circle of worried faces. These were men who had faced combat, who had survived tours in dangerous places around the world. But the sight of their friend burning up with fever had reduced them to anxious uncertainty. They reminded her of Marcus, when he was scared and looking to her for comfort. It's okay, she said calmly. Fever is the body's way of fighting infection. We just need to keep him cool and make sure he stays hydrated. She disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a basin of cool water and several washcloths. Settling herself on the edge of the couch beside Danny, she began gently bathing his face and neck with the cool cloths. Danny, honey, can you hear me? She said softly. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Where am I? You're safe, Kesha replied, her voice taking on the gentle tone she used with Marcus when he was sick. You're in my house and your friends are here. You have a fever, but I'm going to take care of you. For the next several hours, Kesha moved between the kitchen and the living room, boiling water for tea, preparing cool compresses, and monitoring Danny's temperature. The other bikers watched her work with something approaching awe. She moved with quiet efficiency, her hands steady and sure as she tended to their friend. Mama, Danny mumbled during one of his delirious moments, reaching out blindly. Without hesitation, Kesha took his hand in hers. I'm here, baby. You're going to be fine. Mike stood in the doorway, watching this exchange. His expression unreadable. When Kesha looked up and caught his eye, she saw something there that made her chest tighten. Respect, certainly. Gratitude, but also something deeper. Recognition. As if he was seeing something in her that he had been looking for, but hadn't expected to find. Around 3 a.m, Danny's fever finally broke. His breathing became easier, and the tight lines of pain around his eyes relaxed. Kesha felt his forehead one more time, and smiled with relief. He's going to be okay, she announced to the room full of anxious men. The fever's broken. He should sleep peacefully now. A collective sigh of relief swept around the room. Pete actually wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and Tommy patted Kesha's shoulder with gentle gratitude. You saved his life, Mike said quietly. We wouldn't have known what to do. He saved mine too, Kesha replied. All of you did. I haven't felt this useful, this needed in a very long time. As dawn approached, the storm outside finally began to show signs of weakening. The wind had died down to a steady whisper, and the snow was falling more gently. The men began to stir, checking the weather and discussing their departure. Mike found Kesha in the kitchen, where she was preparing coffee and scrambled eggs for breakfast. We'll be leaving soon, he said. Road should be passable in a few hours. Kesha nodded, surprised by how much the thought of their departure saddened her. I'll pack some food for the road. You've got a long ride ahead of you. Kesha, Mike said, his voice serious. What you did for us for Danny, we don't forget things like that. We take care of people who take care of us. She looked up from the eggs she was scrambling, meeting his intense gaze. I didn't do anything special. Anyone would have done the same. Mike shook his head slowly. No, they wouldn't. Most people would have left us out in that storm. Most people see us and cross to the other side of the street. But you opened your door. You fed us. You healed our friend. You treated us like family. You are family, Kesha said simply. At least you feel like family to me. When the time came for them to leave, the goodbye was more emotional than anyone had expected. Each man shook Kesha's hand or hugged her gently, thanking her with words that seemed inadequate for what they were trying to express. Marcus cried when Tommy had to leave, clinging to the older man's leather jacket with heartbreaking determination. I'll see you again, little man, Tommy promised, his own voice thick with emotion. That's a promise. Mike was the last to leave. He pressed an envelope into Kesha's hands despite her protests. It's not charity, he said firmly. It's payment for services rendered. You're a healer, and healers deserve to be compensated for their work. I can't take your money, Kesha said, trying to hand the envelope back. You can and you will. We don't leave debts unpaid. His expression softened slightly. Besides, that little restaurant of yours, the one with your mother's recipes. Don't give up on it. Good food and good hearts like yours will find their way to each other. Kesha stood in her doorway, holding Marcus on her hip, watching 25 motorcycles disappear into the gray morning. The envelope in her pocket felt heavy with possibility, but heavier still was the knowledge that she was once again alone. The house felt enormous and silent after they left. She and Marcus ate breakfast in a kitchen that seemed too big for just 2 people, but something had changed during the night. The loneliness was still there, but it felt different now. Less like a permanent condition, and more like a temporary state of being. Mama, Marcus said, pointing toward the door. Friends come back. Kesha looked at her son's hopeful face and smiled. I don't know, baby, but if they need us, I think they will. She opened the envelope Mike had given her and gasped. There was more money inside than she made in 3 months at any of her previous jobs, enough to pay her rent, fix her heater, and maybe even buy some proper equipment for her restaurant. But more valuable than the money was the note written in Mike's careful handwriting. Asterisk for Mama Kesha, who showed us what family really means. We won't forget the brotherhood. For the first time in years, Kesha Williams went to bed believing that tomorrow might be better than today. 3 days after the Hell's Angels had vanished into the gray morning, Kesha's house felt like a tomb. The silence pressed against her ears with an almost physical weight, broken only by Marcus' occasional babbling as he played with his toys. She had grown so accustomed to the sound of 25 voices, the gentle rumble of conversation, and the warmth of shared meals that the emptiness now felt suffocating. The money Mike had left sat on her kitchen table in neat stacks, $800, more than she had seen at one time in years, enough to pay the overdue electric bill, buy groceries for a month, maybe even fix the heater. But somehow, looking at those bills felt like staring at the remnants of a beautiful dream that was already fading. She had tried to restart her restaurant business, using some of the money to buy fresh ingredients and making a new sign for her window, but the cruel reality hadn't changed. In 3 days, exactly 0 customers had walked through her door. The smell of her mother's fried chicken had filled the house with hope and memory, but hope didn't pay bills, and memory didn't feed a hungry child. By the 4th day, the food she had prepared was beginning to spoil. Marcus had developed a cold that made him fussy and clingy, crying for hours despite her efforts to comfort him. The house felt colder somehow, as if the warmth the bikers had brought with them had been sucked out through the cracks in the walls when they left.
Mana, hungry.
Marcus whimpered from his high chair, pushing away the small portion of scrambled eggs she had made him. It was the 3rd meal in a row he had refused, and Kesha was beginning to panic. She opened the refrigerator and stared at its meager contents. The milk was nearly gone, and she couldn't afford to buy more until she figured out how to stretch the money Mike had given her. The sight of her hungry child refusing food because he was too sick to eat properly made her stomach clench with a familiar desperation.
Come on.
Baby, she pleaded, desperately trying to coax him into swallowing just a tiny bit more of the egg. Just a little bit for Mama, please? But Marcus, his small face screwed up in protest, stubbornly turned his head away. Then the tears started, a thin, reedy wail that seemed to amplify in the stark emptiness of the room, bouncing off the bare walls like a mournful echo. His tiny nose began to run, and his frail body shook with each heart-wrenching sob, a miniature earthquake of misery. Kesha, her heart twisting with each cry, scooped him up into her arms and held him close, pressing him against her chest. She could feel the alarming heat radiating from his little body, the unmistakable prelude to a full-blown fever. Her gaze drifted to the meager pile of money lying on the worn table, and a chilling realization washed over her, a wave of dread that threatened to drown her. She was faced with an impossible choice, a Sophie's choice for a desperate mother: use the precious money for desperately needed medicine and nourishing food for her ailing son, or safeguard it to pay the rent that was looming just 2 weeks away, a deadline that felt like an execution date. There simply wasn't enough to cover both, the cruel mathematics of poverty staring her in the face. But in her heart, the decision was no decision at all, a foregone conclusion etched in maternal instinct. Her son, her precious Marcus, came first, always and without question. He was her sun, her moon, her entire universe. With a resolute sigh, she bundled Marcus in his warmest, albeit threadbare, coat, wrapping him tightly against the biting chill of the late afternoon air. Stepping outside felt like embarking on a sorrowful march to the gallows, each step a heavy burden of desperation. She had exhausted all other options, wrung her hands raw searching for a solution, but she had reached the end of her rope. Mrs. Henderson, the closest neighbor, was her last, desperate hope, a lifeline she was terrified to grasp. Despite their decidedly unpleasant previous encounter, the woman represented her best chance at securing help, a fragile possibility flickering in the darkness. The older woman's house stood in stark contrast to Kesha's own humble abode, a testament to order and prosperity. It was neat, well-maintained, almost aggressively perfect, with a perfectly manicured lawn that even in the dead of winter possessed a vibrancy and meticulousness that Kesha's humble yard had never even approached. She climbed the neatly swept front steps with Marcus cradled on her hip, his fevered face buried against her shoulder, seeking comfort and solace. With a trembling hand, she knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the strained silence of her hope. After what felt like an eternity, 3 agonizing knocks later, Mrs. Henderson finally answered the door, her perfectly sculpted face immediately contorting into a sour expression of displeasure and disdain as she recognized the figure standing on her porch. "What do you want?" she snapped, dispensing with even the slightest pretense of civility or neighborly pleasantries. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry to bother you," Kesha began, her voice laced with a plea, "but my son, Marcus, he's terribly sick. I was just hoping if you might have some children's medicine I could borrow, or maybe just a small amount of milk. I can pay you back, I promise, as soon as I possibly can." "Absolutely not." Mrs. Henderson's voice was as sharp and brittle as shattered glass, each word a stinging shard of rejection. "I told you before, I want absolutely nothing to do with your kind of trouble. Stay away from me. Please," Kesha begged, unable to mask the desperation that was now bleeding into her voice, a raw, vulnerable sound. "He's just a baby, Mrs. Henderson. He has a raging fever, and I desperately need to get some medicine into him, but I can't afford both the medicine and the milk. He won't take the medicine without it." "That's not my problem," the woman retorted, her eyes hard and unforgiving. Mrs. Henderson began to close the door, her movements brisk and dismissive. But Kesha, fueled by a mother's fierce love, stepped forward, her hand reaching out instinctively, grasping for a lifeline. "Wait, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm begging you, Mrs. Henderson. Just this once. I'll do anything." Mrs. Henderson's face twisted with unconcealed disgust, her features contorted in a mask of contempt. "Get your hands off my door," she spat, her voice dripping with venom, "and get off my property before I call the police. I've warned you before." "Mrs. Henderson, please," Kesha cried out, her voice breaking with anguish. "He's burning up with fever. I said get off my property." The older woman, fueled by a cold, unyielding heart, shoved Kesha backward with surprising force, her actions betraying a hidden well of malice. Already off balance from carrying the weight of her sick child, Kesha stumbled backward, her feet slipping on the treacherous, icy surface. She lost her footing and fell hard onto the frozen sidewalk, the impact sending a jolt of pain through her body. Marcus screamed in terror as they hit the unforgiving ground, his cries piercing the cold air like shards of glass. Kesha felt a sharp, searing pain shoot through her elbow where it had struck the concrete, a blinding flash of agony that threatened to overwhelm her. Stay away from decent people. Mrs. Henderson called out from the safety of her doorway, her voice dripping with disdain and moral superiority. Take your bastard child and your welfare problems somewhere else. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we don't want your kind here. The door slammed shut with a resounding finality, the sound echoing through Kesha's chest like a physical blow, a crushing weight of despair. She sat there on the cold, unforgiving sidewalk, cradling her crying son in her arms, feeling the sting of tears on her cheeks mingling with the deeper, more profound sting of humiliation that burned in her heart. She felt utterly broken, stripped bare of dignity and hope.
Nana hort.
Marcus sobbed, reaching up with a trembling hand to touch her face, his innocent eyes filled with concern. I know, baby, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Mama's hurt too. With a monumental effort, fueled by sheer will and a mother's unwavering love, she struggled to her feet, her elbow throbbing with pain, her pride shattered into a million pieces that she wasn't sure she could ever reassemble. The walk home felt endless, an agonizing journey through a landscape of despair. Marcus's weight seemed to increase with every step, each footfall a leaden echo of her broken spirit. The cold, relentless wind seeped through her worn coat like a living thing, biting at her skin and chilling her to the bone. As she passed the last house on the block, a humble dwelling she had never really noticed before, she heard a voice call out from behind her, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. Honey, are you all right? Kesha turned to see an elderly black woman standing in the doorway of the small house, her presence radiating warmth and compassion. The woman looked to be in her late 70s, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her kind eyes filled with genuine concern. Wrinkles lined her face, etched with the stories of a long life, each crease a testament to resilience and empathy. I saw what happened over there, the woman said, stepping out onto her porch despite the bitter cold, her voice a soothing balm on Kesha's wounded soul. That Henderson woman is nothing but meanness wrapped up in Sunday clothes. You come here, child. Both of you look like you need some help. Kesha hesitated, wary and uncertain after the cruel rejection she had just endured. Kindness felt almost foreign, a forgotten language in the harsh landscape of her life. But Marcus was still burning with fever, his small body trembling in her arms, and she was, undeniably, out of options. Desperation gnawed at her, overriding her apprehension. I don't want to be any trouble, she said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Trouble. The woman laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to chase away some of the oppressive cold, a melody of hope. Honey, helping folks in need isn't trouble. It's what we're supposed to do. It's what gives life meaning. I'm Martha, and you're coming inside right now before that baby catches pneumonia. Martha's house was small but immaculately clean, a haven of warmth and comfort. The air inside was filled with a comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and something else, something intangible but deeply familiar, a scent that reminded Kesha of her own mother's kitchen, a memory that brought a lump to her throat. Family, love, home. These were the feelings that permeated the air, creating an atmosphere of sanctuary and peace. Sit yourself down right there, Martha instructed, pointing to a comfortable armchair near the crackling fireplace. Let me take a look at this little angel. Martha examined Marcus with the gentle expertise of someone who had raised children of her own, her touch practiced and reassuring. She checked his temperature with a seasoned hand, peered into his throat with a practiced eye, and listened to his breathing with an old, well-worn stethoscope she pulled from a kitchen drawer, each movement filled with tender care. He's got a little cold, she announced, her voice calm and reassuring, but nothing that won't clear up with some rest and proper care. It's nothing to panic over. I've got children's medicine in the bathroom, and there's fresh milk in the refrigerator. You just sit tight while I get everything together. Kesha watched in amazement as Martha bustled around her small kitchen, her movements a whirlwind of efficiency and compassion. She prepared warm milk with honey, a time-honored remedy for soothing a sore throat, gathered the necessary medicine, and even wrapped up some of the fresh bread she had been baking, her actions fueled by an innate desire to help. The older woman moved with the grace and efficiency of someone accustomed to taking care of others, her presence a soothing balm on Kesha's weary soul. Her kindness felt like a warm blanket after hours spent shivering in the cold, a tangible expression of human compassion. Why are you helping us? Kesha asked quietly, her voice filled with gratitude and a hint of disbelief. Martha paused, her hand instinctively touching a silver necklace that hung around her neck, a piece of jewelry that seemed to hold a story within its delicate links. It was an unusual piece, old-looking, with intricate engravings that caught the firelight, a testament to a bygone era. Because I know what it's like to be alone and scared with a sick child, Martha said simply, her eyes filled with empathy and understanding. And because my mama always told me that kindness comes back to you when you need it most. What goes around, comes around, child. Always. She pressed a small, sealed envelope into Kesha's hands along with a bag of groceries, her touch conveying a silent message of support and hope. This should help with whatever bills are pressing on you. And don't you dare try to refuse it, she added with a gentle firmness. I've got more money than I need and no children to spend it on. It would bring me joy to see it put to good use. Marcus had already begun to perk up after taking the medicine, his small body relaxing in the warmth of Martha's home. He was currently fascinated by a small, intricately carved music box that Martha had given him to play with, his eyes wide with wonder as the delicate melody filled the air. The sight of her son smiling for the first time in days brought tears to Kesha's eyes, a torrent of gratitude and relief. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You've saved us. You don't need to thank me, honey, Martha replied, her voice soft and comforting. You just take care of that beautiful baby, and remember that there are still good people in this world. More good than bad, even if it doesn't always feel that way. Hold on to that thought, especially when times get tough. As Kesha walked home with Marcus cradled safely in her arms and Martha's generous gifts clutched in her hands, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a flicker of light in the darkness. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay, that brighter days were within reach. She had no way of knowing that just 3 days later, her quiet street would be filled with the thunderous roar of 1,500 motorcycles, an army of steel and chrome descending upon her humble home. Nor could she have imagined that the simple act of kindness Martha had shown her would turn out to be inextricably connected to the kindness she had shown 25 stranded strangers during a raging snowstorm, a ripple effect of compassion that would change her life forever. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, orchestrating events with a precision that defies logic. And sometimes, the smallest, seemingly insignificant acts of compassion create ripples that travel farther than anyone could ever imagine, touching countless lives along the way. 3 days had passed since Martha's unexpected kindness had pulled Kesha back from the very brink of despair, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Marcus was feeling significantly better, his fever completely gone, and his appetite had returned with a vengeance, transforming him back into the perpetually hungry toddler she knew and loved. The medicine and Martha's tender care had worked their magic, restoring his health and bringing back his cheerful, curious demeanor. He was back to his old self, babbling happily as he played with the small toys Martha had given him, his laughter filling the small house with a symphony of joy. Kesha had used Martha's generous gift wisely, meticulously prioritizing her needs and allocating the money with careful precision. She had bought much-needed groceries to replenish their dwindling supplies, and she had paid off the most urgent bills, staving off the immediate threat of eviction. The envelope had contained $200, a small fortune in her current circumstances, and a note written in Martha's careful, elegant handwriting. For a mother who reminds me of myself at your age. The note read, "Keep your chin up, honey. Better days are coming. I know it." She was in the kitchen preparing lunch, chopping vegetables for a simple soup, when she first felt it. A subtle vibration, so faint at first that she initially dismissed it as a large truck passing by on the main road, a common occurrence in their neighborhood. But the trembling didn't stop. Instead, it grew stronger, more persistent, traveling up through the floorboards and into the soles of her feet, a palpable hum that resonated through her entire being. Marcus looked up from his toys, his eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. "Mama, what that?" he asked, his small voice filled with a childlike innocence. The vibration intensified, becoming a deep, resonating rumble. The dishes in her cabinets began to rattle softly, a subtle tremor that hinted at the immense power that was approaching. Kesha, her heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, moved cautiously to the front window and peered through the curtains, her eyes scanning the street. But the street appeared deserted, eerily still. Yet the rumbling sound was growing louder, deeper, more insistent, like distant thunder that refused to move on, a storm gathering on the horizon. Then she saw them. They appeared at the far end of Maple Street, emerging from the distance like a surreal vision from another world, a scene ripped from the pages of a fantastical tale. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. No, not dozens. Hundreds. An endless, shimmering line of chrome and steel that stretched back beyond what her eyes could see, an unbroken chain of mechanical beasts flowing towards her house like a dark, metallic river, their presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth in disbelief, her mind struggling to comprehend the unfolding scene. The lead motorcycles reached her house and began to arrange themselves in precise, military-style formations along both sides of the street, their riders exhibiting a level of discipline that was both unexpected and unsettling. Behind them came more and more, an unending stream of bikes until the quiet residential road looked like the staging area for the world's largest and most intimidating motorcycle rally, a scene of organized chaos that defied explanation. The thunderous rumble of 1,500 Harley-Davidson engines created a sound unlike anything Kesha had ever experienced, a mechanical symphony of raw power and untamed energy that seemed to shake the very air, vibrating through her bones and resonating in her soul. Marcus, oblivious to the potential danger, had climbed onto a chair to get a better view out the window, clapping his hands with delight at the spectacle, his innocent joy a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside Kesha. "Big bikes, Mama," he exclaimed, his face lit up with excitement. So many big bikes. Kesha stood frozen in her doorway, her mind racing, trying to process what she was seeing, trying to make sense of the impossible scene unfolding before her eyes. The motorcycles continued to arrive, their riders dismounting and arranging themselves in orderly lines, their movements precise and coordinated. These weren't just random bikers who had happened upon her street. There was a clear sense of purpose and organization. This was planned. This was intentional. This was about her, a spotlight shining on her life. The front door of every house on Maple Street opened as neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion and eager to witness the unprecedented sight that had disrupted their quiet suburban lives. Mrs. Henderson stood rigid on her perfectly manicured lawn, her face pale with shock, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Other neighbors gathered in small groups, pointing and whispering among themselves, their expressions ranging from amazement to abject terror, a silent chorus of speculation and intrigue. At the head of the massive formation, Kesha recognized a familiar figure, a face that sparked both relief and apprehension. Mike sat astride his bike, his presence commanding and resolute. But he wasn't alone. Beside him were Tommy, Jake, Pete, and all the others who had sought refuge in her home during that long, snowy night, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of shared hardship and Kesha's unexpected kindness. But behind them were hundreds more men and women, a vast legion of leather-clad riders wearing the same jackets, the same patches, the same expressions of quiet determination, a silent army united by a common purpose. Mike dismounted his bike with a fluid, practiced motion and began walking towards her house, his boots hitting the pavement with a purposeful stride. As he moved, the 1,500 engines behind him fell silent in perfect unison, creating a sudden, profound silence that was almost more shocking than the thunderous roar had been. The absence of sound was somehow more impressive, more powerful, than the overwhelming noise had been. "Kesha," Mike called out, his voice carrying easily in the still air, his words clear and concise. "We need to talk." She stepped out onto her porch, Marcus still cradled on her hip, feeling the collective gaze of 1,500 bikers and dozens of curious neighbors focused intently on her, their eyes scrutinizing her every move. The magnitude of the moment pressed down on her like a physical weight, a crushing burden of expectation. Mike, what is this?" she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are you all here? What's going on?" He stopped at the bottom of her front steps, his expression serious but not threatening, his eyes conveying a sense of unwavering resolve. Behind him, the massive formation of motorcycles and riders waited with military precision, a silent, imposing force. "We told you we don't forget," he said simply, his voice low and steady. "And we don't leave debts unpaid." A murmur ran through the crowd of neighbors, a ripple of curiosity and intrigue. Kesha could see Mrs. Henderson edging closer, her initial fear apparently overcome by an insatiable curiosity. "I don't understand," Kesha said, her mind still reeling, although a part of her was beginning to suspect that something truly extraordinary was about to happen, something that would forever alter the course of her life. Tommy appeared beside Mike, carrying a large manila envelope, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. "Kesha," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "That night, you saved our lives. You gave us food when we were starving, you gave us shelter when we were freezing, and you healed Danny when he was at his lowest. You treated us like family when the whole world treats us like criminals. We haven't forgotten your generosity." "We've been busy these past 3 days," added Jake, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by something more solemn and serious. "Making phone calls, calling in favors, reaching out to every chapter from here to California. Spreading the word about what you did for us." Mike gestured toward the assembled crowd behind him, his arm sweeping across the vast expanse of motorcycles and riders. "These are our brothers and sisters from across the country," he explained, his voice filled with pride. "Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. When we told them about what you did, about who you are, they wanted to meet you. They wanted to thank you in person." A woman biker near the front of the formation stepped forward, her presence commanding and confident. She was tall and strong with graying hair pulled back from her face, revealing kind eyes that reminded Kesha somehow of her own mother, a comforting familiarity in the midst of chaos. "I'm Sarah from the Chicago chapter," she said, her voice warm but strong, resonating with authority. "We heard about a woman who opened her door to 25 strangers in a blizzard, a woman who didn't hesitate to help those in need. We wanted to meet you and lend a hand in whatever way we can." "We heard about a mother who saved a young man's life with nothing but kindness and home remedies," added another biker, this one from Cleveland, his voice filled with respect. "Word travels fast in our community. We may live on the fringes of society, but we have a code of honor, and we never forget a debt." Stories about real kindness, real courage, they spread like wildfire. Another voice chimed in, a chorus of support echoing through the crowd. Mike reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a thick, bulging envelope. "Kesha, this is from all of us," he said, extending the envelope towards her. "Every chapter contributed. It's enough to pay off every debt you have, fix up this house, and get your restaurant running properly." Kesha stared at the envelope, her mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. "I can't take this," she stammered, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's too much. I just did what anyone would do." "No," said Tommy firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You did what almost no one would do, and that makes all the difference. You showed us the true meaning of compassion, and that's something we can never repay." The distant sound of news vans could be heard approaching, their engines adding to the growing mechanical chorus. Word was spreading quickly through the community, and beyond that something unprecedented was happening on Maple Street, a modern-day miracle unfolding before their very eyes. "There's more," Mike continued, his eyes sparkling with determination. "We've got contractors, electricians, plumbers, all riding with us. We're going to fix this house properly, make it into the kind of restaurant it deserves to be." Sarah stepped forward again, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "And we got a marketing plan, social media experts, word-of-mouth campaigns, and food bloggers all lined up. By the time we're done, everyone in Detroit is going to know about Mama Kesha's kitchen." Kesha felt tears streaming uncontrollably down her cheeks as the full magnitude of their generosity washed over her, overwhelming her senses. These people, who had been complete strangers just days before, had organized a vast support network that spanned multiple states, their efforts coordinated with astonishing precision. They had transformed her small act of kindness into something that would change her life forever, a testament to the power of human connection. "Why?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Why would you do all this for me? I don't understand." Mike's expression softened, and for a moment she saw not the intimidating leader of a motorcycle club, but the grieving father who had lost his daughter, the man who had carried the weight of his loss with quiet dignity. "Because you showed us what family really means," he said quietly, his voice filled with heartfelt gratitude. "You showed us that kindness still exists in this world, and that there are people who are willing to help others without expecting anything in return. And because sometimes, when someone saves your life, you get the chance to save theirs right back." The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. Kesha could see camera phones recording everything, capturing every moment of this extraordinary event. Mrs. Henderson stood at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, her face a mask of confusion and what might have been the beginning of shame, her previous arrogance replaced by a dawning realization of her own moral failings. Marcus wiggled in her arms, wanting to get down and see the motorcycles up close, his childlike wonder undeterred by the gravity of the situation. Tommy stepped forward with a gentle smile, his eyes filled with warmth. "Can I?" he asked, and when Kesha nodded, he carefully took Marcus into his arms, cradling him with surprising tenderness. The toddler immediately began pointing at the bikes and chattering excitedly, his face radiant with joy. "Big bikes," he exclaimed, his voice filled with glee. "So many big bikes." "That's right, little man," Tommy said warmly, his voice filled with affection. "And every single one of them came here because your mama is the bravest, kindest woman we know." As if responding to some invisible signal, the 1,500 bikers began to move, their movements coordinated and purposeful. They didn't mount their motorcycles or rev their engines, creating a cacophony of noise. Instead, they began walking toward Kesha's house, each one carrying something in their hands. Tools, building supplies, paint, lumber, kitchen equipment, everything needed to transform her small, dilapidated home into a proper, thriving restaurant, a testament to their collective generosity and determination. "We're going to get to work," Mike announced, his voice ringing with authority. "And we're not leaving until Mama Kesha's kitchen is ready to serve the best soul food in Detroit." The transformation of Maple Street from a quiet residential road into a bustling construction site unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen was about to begin, a metamorphosis fueled by compassion and a shared desire to repay a debt of gratitude. And at the center of it all stood a single mother who had opened her door to strangers in a storm, never imagining that her simple act of kindness would summon an army of angels on motorcycles, a force of nature that would forever change her life. Within an hour, Kesha's quiet street had transformed into something resembling a small-town festival, a celebration of community, and the enduring power of human kindness. The 1,500 Hells Angels had organized themselves with military precision, creating efficient work crews that tackled different aspects of renovating her house. Some focused on the exterior, tearing down rotting siding and replacing it with fresh lumber, while others concentrated on plumbing and electrical work, modernizing the outdated systems. A dedicated team worked on expanding, and to simply witness the power of a family reunited was a sight that stilled the soul. "I don't understand," Mrs. Henderson stammered, her voice a fractured whisper as she pushed through the throng of onlookers. Her brow furrowed with bewilderment, her eyes darting about as if searching for an explanation etched in the very air. How is this possible? What are the odds of something like this happening? Kesha's gaze drifted toward the woman who, just days before, had shoved her aside with cruel indifference, who had hurled venomous words at her son, and who had callously turned a blind eye when she desperately needed help. She braced herself for the familiar sting of anger, the righteous indignation that had been her constant companion. But instead, a wave of something akin to pity washed over her, softening the hard edges of her resentment. "Sometimes, kindness has a way of finding its way back home," Kesha said softly, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "Sometimes, when you extend a helping hand to someone else, you're unknowingly helping yourself in ways you can't even imagine." As if drawn by Kesha's words, Martha looked up from her joyous reunion with Danny, her eyes meeting Kesha's across the sea of faces. A flicker of recognition sparked within her gaze, followed by a dawning understanding. "You," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "You're the woman who saved my son's life. You're the reason he survived that terrible fever. And you're the woman who saved mine and Marcus's lives when we had nowhere else to turn, when the world seemed to have abandoned us." Kesha offered a gentle smile. "I guess we've been taking care of each other's children without even realizing it." A roar of cheers erupted from the crowd, a tidal wave of jubilation that mingled with the thunderous revving of 1,500 motorcycle engines as the Hells Angels celebrated the impossible reunion they had inadvertently orchestrated. In the span of a single week, a raging blizzard, a simple act of kindness, and a community of unlikely guardian angels had conspired to bring together a mother and son who had been searching for each other for 3 long decades. Mrs. Henderson stood on the periphery of the celebration, a silent observer of the unfolding joy. For the first time in years, a crack appeared in the hardened shell around her heart, and she began to glimpse the richness she had been missing by keeping her heart closed to her neighbors, by building walls instead of bridges. The euphoric celebration that followed Martha and Danny's reunion seemed to infuse the entire street with an almost palpable energy. What had begun as a simple construction project had blossomed into something resembling a vibrant neighborhood festival, with the Hells Angels working shoulder to shoulder with curious neighbors who had gradually shed their apprehension and joined in to help. The barriers that had separated the community for so long were crumbling as rapidly as the walls being torn down in Kesha's house. By sunset, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The small, cramped house that had once barely contained a kitchen table and 2 folding chairs now boasted a spacious, fully equipped restaurant. The Hells Angels had worked with the precision and efficiency of a seasoned construction crew, expanding the dining area, installing state-of-the-art commercial kitchen equipment, and even adding a welcoming sign above the front door that proudly proclaimed, "Mama Kesha's Kitchen, where love is the secret ingredient." "I can't believe this is my house," Kesha whispered, her voice filled with awe. Standing in the doorway of what was now a professional-grade restaurant kitchen, gleaming stainless steel stoves reflected the new lighting, and expanded counter space offered ample room for serious culinary creations. A walk-in cooler hummed quietly in the corner, promising a steady supply of fresh ingredients. "Believe it," said Sarah from the Chicago chapter, wiping streaks of paint from her hands with a satisfied grin. "And believe this, too. We've already set up your social media accounts and your story is spreading like wildfire across the internet. You're going to have more customers than you know what to do with." Martha, who had been glued to Danny's side since their reunion, approached Kesha, her eyes still shimmering with happy tears. "Honey, I need you to know something," Martha said, taking Kesha's hands in her weathered ones. "When I helped you the other day, I thought I was just doing what any decent person would do. I had no idea I was helping the woman who had saved my son's life, the woman who gave him a second chance. And I had no idea the woman who saved me was Danny's mother," Kesha replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It's like the universe was trying to tell us something, trying to guide us together." "It was telling us that we're family," Martha said firmly, her grip tightening on Kesha's hands. "All of us. You, me, Marcus, Danny, and every single one of these angels on motorcycles." Mike appeared beside them, his leather jacket now dusted with construction debris, but his face radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "Kesha, we need to settle some unfinished business," he said, pulling out another envelope. "This contains the deed to your house. It's paid off completely. No more rent, no more landlord. This place belongs to you and Marcus now, forever." Kesha stared at the legal documents in disbelief, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of the gift. "Mike, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's far too generous." "You can and you will," he said, his voice brooking no argument, the same firm tone he had used about the money. "A restaurant needs stability. You can't build a business if you're constantly worried about where you're going to live. This is how it has to be." Danny stepped forward, his arm protectively around Martha's shoulders. "Besides, we're going to be regular customers. Martha's already promised to help you perfect some of the old family recipes, the ones that have been passed down for generations. And I've got some stories to tell about this young man's childhood that might help you understand why he's so stubborn about taking care of people," Martha added with a loving smile at her son. News crews had captured every moment of the day's events, and word was already spreading far beyond the city limits of Detroit. The story of the single mother who had sheltered 25 Hells Angels and inadvertently reunited a family was resonating with people across the country, striking a chord deep within the collective human heart. Orders for Kesha's food were already pouring in from people who simply wanted to support the woman who had opened her door to strangers in need. As evening approached, the neighbors who had spent the day watching from a respectful distance began to approach more directly, their curiosity overcoming their initial hesitation. Mrs. Johnson was the first to cross the street, carrying a covered dish with both hands. I brought some cornbread, she said shyly, her eyes downcast. I thought maybe we could all have dinner together, try out the new restaurant. That sounds wonderful, Kesha replied, accepting the dish with genuine warmth, her heart swelling with gratitude. Mr. Davis shuffled over with his wife, both of them looking slightly overwhelmed by everything they had witnessed. We wanted to apologize, Mrs. Davis said quietly, her voice laced with regret. We've lived next to you for 2 years and never once made an effort to get to know you, to say hello, to even acknowledge you. That was wrong of us, Mr. Davis added, nodding in agreement. We let our own fears and prejudices blind us. We've all made mistakes, Kesha replied gently, her gaze encompassing both of them. What matters is what we do going forward, how we choose to learn from those mistakes and become better people. Even some of the younger families from down the street had gathered their children, their faces alight with fascination as they gazed at the motorcycles and the bikers, who patiently answered their endless questions about the machines, explaining the mechanics and the history with a surprising gentleness. But it was Mrs. Henderson's approach that surprised everyone the most. The older woman walked slowly across the street, her face a mask of internal struggle, her steps hesitant. When she reached the group gathered around Kesha's front porch, she stopped and took a deep, fortifying breath. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice barely a whisper, trembling with sincerity. A big one. What I did the other day, how I treated you and your son, it was inexcusable. There is no excuse for my behavior. The crowd fell silent, all eyes riveted on the woman who had been so cruel and dismissive just days before, the woman who had embodied the very worst of their community's divisions. I was wrong about you, Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice growing stronger, gaining conviction with each word. I was wrong about a lot of things. Watching what happened here today, seeing how these people treat you like family, understanding what kind of person you really are, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm truly and deeply ashamed. Kesha looked at the woman who had shoved her down in the street, who had called her child terrible names, who had refused the simplest request for help. The anger she had expected to feel, the bitterness she had nurtured for so long, simply evaporated, replaced by something closer to understanding, a recognition of the shared human struggle. We all have bad days, Mrs. Henderson, Kesha said quietly, her voice filled with compassion. What matters is how we choose to move forward, how we pick ourselves up and try to be better. I'd like to be a better neighbor, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice thick with emotion, tears welling in her eyes. If you'll let me, if you can ever forgive me. Everyone's welcome at Mama Kesha's kitchen, Kesha replied with a genuine smile, her arms open wide in a gesture of acceptance. Everyone. There are no exceptions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Maple Street, an impromptu block party began to take shape. The Hells Angels had brought out portable grills and were cooking alongside neighbors who had contributed dishes from their own kitchens, a vibrant tapestry of flavors and traditions blending together in a celebration of unity. Children ran between the motorcycles, their laughter echoing through the warm summer air, mixing with the deeper voices of the bikers who had appointed themselves honorary uncles and aunts, protectors and playmates. Marcus had claimed his position as the unofficial mascot of the celebration, moving from person to person with the confidence of a child who had never known strangers, only friends he hadn't met yet. Tommy had fashioned him a miniature leather vest that read Little Angel on the back, a testament to the impact the little boy had had on their hardened hearts. And Marcus wore it with enormous pride, strutting around like a pint-sized ambassador of goodwill. Look, Mama, Marcus called out, running to show off his vest, his eyes sparkling with delight. I'm a big boy now. I'm one of the angels. You sure are, baby, Kesha replied, scooping him up for a hug, her heart overflowing with love. You're the biggest, bravest boy I know. And you're a little angel. Martha had taken charge of organizing the community dinner, moving through the crowd with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime bringing people together, a natural leader who possessed an uncanny ability to connect with others. She coordinated dishes, made sure everyone had enough to eat, and somehow managed to remember everyone's name within hours of meeting them, a testament to her genuine interest in the lives of others. This is what a neighborhood is supposed to feel like, she told Kesha as they watched the diverse group sharing food and stories, a picture of harmony and acceptance. This is what community really means. This is what we've been missing for so long. Mike found Kesha as the evening wound down, most of the work crews having finished their tasks, the transformation of her house complete. Tomorrow would mark the official opening of Mama Kesha's kitchen, a new beginning not just for her, but for the entire community. I have one more thing for you, he said, pulling out a small, well-worn leather journal. This contains contact information for every chapter that contributed to today. If you ever need anything at all, you call us. You're part of the family now, permanently, and family looks out for each other. Mike, I don't know how to thank you, any of you, Kesha said, her voice choked with emotion. This is beyond anything I ever imagined. You've given us a new life. You don't need to thank us, he replied, his gaze steady and sincere. You just need to keep being who you are. Keep opening your door to people who need help. Keep showing the world what real kindness looks like, and the world will be a better place. As the Hells Angels began to mount their motorcycles for the journey back to their respective homes, the neighbors who had spent the day working alongside them gathered to say goodbye, their faces etched with gratitude and newfound respect. Handshakes turned into hugs, email addresses were exchanged, and promises to stay in touch were made with genuine sincerity, the bonds forged in the crucible of shared experience proving stronger than any preconceived notions. This isn't goodbye, Tommy told Marcus as he lifted the little boy up for one last hug, his gruff voice softening with affection. Uncle Tommy is going to come visit all the time, and when you get big enough, maybe I'll teach you how to ride a motorcycle. Really? Marcus's eyes lit up with excitement, his face beaming with anticipation. Really? You'll teach me to ride? Really? Tommy confirmed with a wink. But first, you have to help your mama make this the best restaurant in Detroit. That's your most important job. I will, I promise, Marcus declared, his voice filled with determination. I'll be the best helper ever. The 1,500 motorcycles that had filled Maple Street began to depart in small groups, their engines creating a powerful symphony that seemed to carry with it the promise that this was not an ending, but a vibrant beginning, a rebirth of community and connection. As the last of the bikes disappeared into the night, the street fell quiet except for the sounds of neighbors cleaning up together and children's laughter echoing through the warm summer air, a soundtrack of hope and unity. Kesha stood in the doorway of her transformed home, holding Marcus on her hip, with Martha and Danny beside her, her heart overflowing with gratitude. And a street full of neighbors who were no longer strangers, but friends, confidants, and fellow travelers on the journey of life. The loneliness that had pressed down on her for so long had vanished, replaced by something she had almost forgotten existed, a sense of belonging, a feeling of being truly home. Mama, Marcus said sleepily, his head resting on her shoulder, his voice soft and childlike. Are we happy now? Kesha looked around at the faces of her new family, at the restaurant that would allow her to build a future for her son, at the community that had embraced them both with open arms. Yes, baby, she whispered, her voice full of wonder and gratitude, tears streaming down her face. We're happy now. We're finally, truly happy. Tomorrow would bring the grand opening of Mama Kesha's kitchen, and with it the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for Kesha and Marcus, but for an entire community that had learned what miracles were possible when people chose kindness over fear, understanding over judgment, and love over isolation. 6 months later, the transformation of Maple Street was complete in ways that went far beyond the physical renovation of Kesha's house, exceeding even the wildest of expectations. What had once been a divided neighborhood, where people barely acknowledged each other, had blossomed into a genuine community, where children played together across property lines and neighbors gathered regularly for impromptu barbecues and block parties, sharing laughter, stories, and the simple joys of life. Mama Kesha's kitchen had become more than just a restaurant. It was the beating heart of the neighborhood, a place where people from all walks of life came together over plates of perfectly seasoned fried chicken and sides that tasted like childhood memories, a culinary haven where everyone felt welcome. The walls were covered with photographs from that miraculous day when 1,500 Hell's Angels had descended on their quiet street, turning it into a construction site powered by love and loyalty, a visual testament to the power of community. The restaurant's success had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Food critics from Detroit's major newspapers had written glowing reviews, calling Kesha's cooking soulful perfection and a taste of authentic family tradition. A major food network had even approached her about featuring the restaurant on a national show, catapulting her into the spotlight. Orders poured in daily from people who had heard the story and wanted to support the woman who had opened her door to strangers in a storm, a testament to the power of human connection. But for Kesha, the most meaningful measure of success wasn't found in newspaper reviews or television coverage. It was found in the small, everyday moments of connection and belonging. It was found in moments like this morning, when she stood in her kitchen at 5 a.m., preparing for another busy day, and realized that the crushing loneliness that had defined her life for so long was nothing more than a distant memory, a ghost from a past that no longer existed. Good morning, Mama Kesha, Danny called out as he entered through the back door, carrying fresh supplies from the market, his face creased in a familiar smile. At 26, he had taken on the role of assistant manager, handling much of the business side of the restaurant, allowing Kesha to focus on what she loved most, cooking. More importantly, he had become like a son to her, a trusted confidant and a source of unwavering support, and she had become a second mother to him, filling a void in his life that had been empty for far too long. Morning, honey, she replied, accepting the kiss on the cheek he gave her every day, a ritual that had become a symbol of their unbreakable bond. Martha's already here, working on those new biscuit recipes. In the dining room, Martha was indeed experimenting with variations on her grandmother's biscuit recipe, trying to perfect a version that would complement Kesha's chicken, her brow furrowed in concentration. At 73, she had found a new purpose in life, splitting her time between helping at the restaurant and organizing community events that brought the neighborhood together, using her wisdom and experience to build bridges and foster connection. Those smell incredible, Kesha said, sampling one of the warm biscuits, her eyes widening with delight. I think we've got a winner. These are the best biscuits I've ever tasted. Good, because we're going to need them for the lunch rush, Martha replied with satisfaction, a twinkle in her eye. Mrs. Henderson called yesterday to reserve a table for 12. She's bringing her church group for their monthly meeting. She insisted on it. The change in Mrs. Henderson had been perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. The woman who had once shoved Kesha to the ground and spewed hateful words had become one of the restaurant's most loyal customers and biggest advocates, a testament to the power of redemption. She had personally brought dozens of new customers to Mama Kesha's kitchen, using her influence in the community to spread the word about the amazing food and the even more amazing story behind it, working tirelessly to make amends for her past behavior. She's trying to make amends, Martha had explained to Kesha early on. Some people need more time to find their way to kindness, but once they do, they hold on to it fierce. They become the most passionate advocates for change. By noon, the restaurant was packed with its usual eclectic mix of customers, a microcosm of the transformed community. Hell's Angels sat at tables next to suburban families, elderly church groups shared space with young professionals, and children from the neighborhood treated the place like a second home, a safe haven where they felt loved and accepted. The diversity that had once seemed impossible on Maple Street was now as natural as breathing, a vibrant tapestry woven from different backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences. Marcus, now 2.5, moved through the restaurant like a tiny host, charming customers with his bright smile and endless chatter, a natural entertainer who thrived on attention. He had grown up surrounded by love from every direction, his mother, his grandmother Martha, his big brother Danny, and the extended family of Hell's Angels who visited regularly, showering him with affection and support. The shy, often sick little boy had blossomed into a confident, joyful child who believed the whole world was his family, a symbol of hope for the future. Uncle Mike, Marcus squealed when the familiar figure appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up with excitement. Mike had kept his promise to stay connected, visiting at least twice a month and bringing different members of his extended brotherhood each time, sharing the story of Mama Kesha's kitchen and the transformative power of kindness. Today he was accompanied by Tommy and several newer faces, young men who had heard the story and wanted to meet the woman who had changed everything for their brothers, inspired by her courage and compassion. There's my little man, Mike said, scooping Marcus up for a hug, his eyes twinkling with affection. Have you been helping your mama in the kitchen? Are you learning to be a chef? I can crack eggs now, Marcus announced proudly, puffing out his chest with pride. Mama says I'm a natural chef. I'm going to make the best food ever. Mama says he's a natural, just like his mama, Mike replied, catching Kesha's eye across the dining room and giving her the warm smile that had become as familiar as family, a symbol of their enduring friendship. The afternoon brought its usual steady stream of customers, but also something special, a reminder of the transformative power of kindness. A bus pulled up outside and 40 children from a Detroit elementary school filed out, part of a field trip that had become a monthly tradition, a beacon of hope for the future. Kesha had started offering free meals to underprivileged school groups, wanting to share not just food, but the message that kindness and community could overcome any obstacle, that even the most difficult circumstances could be transformed by compassion. Miss Kesha called out one of the regular visitors, a 7-year-old named Aisha, whose enthusiasm for the fried chicken was matched only by her love of the stories that came with every meal. Tell us again about the night when all the motorcycle angels came to help you. Tell us the story. Kesha smiled as she settled into the routine that had become as much a part of the restaurant's appeal as the food itself, a comforting ritual that reminded everyone of the power of human connection. She told the story of that snowy night, of the 25 strangers who had needed shelter, of the fever that had nearly claimed Danny's life, and of the miraculous chain of events that had brought a community together, weaving a tale of hope and resilience that resonated with every listener. The most important part, she always concluded, is that kindness is like a seed. You plant it by helping someone, and it grows into something bigger than you ever imagined. Those Hell's Angels planted seeds of kindness everywhere they went, and look what grew from it. Look at what we've created together. That's the power of community. As evening approached and the restaurant began to wind down, Kesha found herself in her usual spot by the kitchen window, watching the street where her miracle had begun, her heart filled with gratitude. The house that had once stood isolated at the end of Maple Street was now the center of a thriving community, a beacon of hope and unity. Children played in yards where parents called greetings to each other across fence lines, laughter filling the air. The division and suspicion that had once characterized the neighborhood had been replaced by connection and mutual support, a testament to the power of human connection. Martha joined her at the window, following her gaze to the street where everything had changed, her eyes filled with a quiet satisfaction. You know what I think about sometimes? Martha said quietly, her voice laced with a touch of melancholy. All the people who are out there right now, feeling lost and alone like you were, feeling scared and abandoned like Danny was, feeling angry and isolated like Mrs. Henderson was. All the people who feel like they don't belong. What about them? Kesha asked, her voice filled with empathy. I think about how all of them are just one act of kindness away from having their whole world change, Martha replied, her gaze unwavering. One person willing to open their door, one stranger willing to help, one moment of choosing love over fear. That's all it takes. Danny appeared beside them, having finished cleaning the kitchen for the day, his presence a source of comfort and strength. The best part is that it doesn't have to be a big gesture, he added, his voice filled with conviction. It can be as simple as sharing a meal, or offering medicine to a sick child, or just treating someone like they matter. It's the small acts of kindness that make the biggest difference. Kesha thought about all the ripples that had spread out from that one snowy night, how one small act of compassion had transformed not just her life, but the lives of so many others. The Hell's Angels who had rediscovered the power of community service, the neighbors who had learned to look beyond appearances and assumptions, the children who visited the restaurant and heard stories about kindness conquering fear, the countless people who had been touched by the story through news coverage and social media, inspired to perform their own acts of compassion. The ripples continued to spread outward, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. Sometimes I wonder if this is what my mother meant when she used to say that helping others was really helping yourself, Kesha mused, a wistful smile playing on her lips. I thought I was just giving those men shelter from a storm, but they ended up sheltering me from a lifetime of loneliness. They gave me a new family. Mike had lingered after the other customers left, and he overheard her words as he approached the window where the three of them stood, his presence a reminder of the unlikely bond that had brought them all together. Your mother was right, he said simply, his voice filled with sincerity. But she was also wrong about one thing. What's that? Kesha asked, her brow furrowing in curiosity. You didn't just help yourself, he said, his gaze locking with hers. You helped all of us remember who we wanted to be. Every person whose life you touched that night, every neighbor who learned to see past their prejudices, every child who comes here and learns that differences don't have to divide us. You helped all of them find their way to something better. You showed us the power of kindness. As the last of the daylight faded and the restaurant settled into quiet, Kesha walked through the dining room one final time, straightening chairs and turning off lights, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. But her real purpose was simpler, to absorb the gratitude that filled every corner of the space she had built through courage, kindness, and the unwavering support of an unlikely family, a space that had become a symbol of hope and unity. Marcus had fallen asleep in one of the booths, exhausted by another day of playing host to dozens of surrogate aunts and uncles, his face serene and peaceful. Danny gently lifted him and carried him toward the stairs that led to their living quarters above the restaurant, his movements careful and tender. Sweet dreams, little angel, Danny whispered, using the nickname that had stuck since that first day when Tommy had made him the miniature leather vest, a term of endearment that reflected the boy's innocence and his impact on their lives. Before heading upstairs herself, Kesha stepped outside onto the front porch where it all began, the place where the storm had brought her a new life. The street was quiet now, lit by the warm glow of light spilling from windows where families were settling in for the evening, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting on the gentle breeze. In the distance, she could hear the faint rumble of motorcycles, probably some of Mike's brotherhood heading home after their visit, their engines a reminder of the bonds that transcended distance and circumstance. She thought about Jerome, her ex-husband, who had abandoned her, and Marcus when life got difficult, who had chosen to run away instead of fighting for his family. She wondered if he ever saw the news coverage or social media posts about Mama Kesha's kitchen, if he ever realized what he had missed, what he had thrown away. She hoped he did, not out of spite, but because she wanted him to see what was possible when people chose to stay and fight for each other instead of running away when things got hard, when they chose to embrace kindness and community over fear and isolation. Thank you, she whispered to the night air, addressing her words to her mother, to the universe, to the mysterious forces that had brought 25 strangers to her door at exactly the moment when she needed them the most, a moment that had changed the course of her life. Thank you for everything. From somewhere in the darkness, the sound of motorcycles grew louder, then faded as they passed by on their way to whatever adventure awaited them next, their engines a symphony of freedom and camaraderie. But Kesha knew that wherever they went, they carried with them the same message that had transformed Maple Street, a message of hope, unity, and the unwavering power of kindness. That kindness was never wasted, that community was stronger than isolation, and that sometimes the people who looked most different from you were exactly the family you needed, the ones who would change your life forever. They were just family we hadn't met yet. She went inside, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to the home where she and Marcus lived, surrounded by love, support, and the certainty that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to plant seeds of kindness in the world, to spread hope and compassion to those who needed it most. In the end, that was the true legacy of Mama Kesha's kitchen, the lasting impact that would endure long after the last plate had been served and the last customer had left. Not just the food, or the success, or even the miraculous reunion it had facilitated, but the reminder it offered to everyone who entered that the smallest acts of compassion could ripple outward in ways that changed everything, that even the most broken lives could be transformed by kindness and community. The story had started with a woman alone in a storm, but it had become something much larger, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a beacon of hope in a world that often felt dark and divided. A testament to the truth that we are all connected, that kindness is always the right choice, and that when we open our hearts to strangers, we often discover that they were never strangers at all. They were just family we hadn't met yet, waiting to be found. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and kindness can always prevail.